In a small, quiet town in Ohio, USA, 19-year-old Emily Carter woke every morning to the same heavy silence. Sunlight filtered through her bedroom window, landing on the wheelchair parked beside her bed. It had been 2 years since the accident, yet the pain of that day still lived inside her bones. Doctors had been clear and cold. She would never walk again. Those words echoed louder than the crash itself. Emily once loved running, dancing, and late-night walks with friends. Now, even standing felt like a distant dream she was afraid to remember. Hope, once bright, had slowly dimmed into routine survival. Emily lived with her mother, Sarah Carter, a 42-year-old single parent who carried strength in her tired eyes. Sarah worked long shifts at a grocery store, sometimes cleaning offices at night just to keep the lights on. Medical bills filled the kitchen drawer, stacked higher than unpaid hopes. Sarah smiled for Emily, always saying things would get better, but when she thought no one was watching, her shoulders sagged. Under invisible weight, she blamed herself for letting Emily ride with that friend on the night of the accident. Guilt followed her everywhere, sitting beside her at the dinner table, whispering in the quiet hours of the night. The accident had happened on a rainy evening. A speeding car ran a red light, smashing into the passenger side where Emily sat. The sound of metal tearing apart still visited Emily in her sleep. She woke, screaming some nights, hands gripping the sheets, legs numb and unresponsive. Physical therapy had helped a little at first, but progress stopped quickly. Doctors spoke in percentages and probabilities, slowly preparing them for acceptance instead of recovery. Emily nodded politely during appointments, but inside she was breaking. She didn't want sympathy, she wanted her life back. Each failed therapy session felt like another goodbye. Their wheelchair was old, donated by a local charity. It squeaked when it moved and often pulled slightly to the left. One afternoon, while Sarah pushed Emily down the street after a medical appointment, the front wheel jammed suddenly. The chair tipped forward, sending panic through both of them. Sarah managed to stop it before Emily fell, but the damage was clear. The wheelchair was no longer safe. Repairs would cost money they didn't. Sarah looked around, desperate, and noticed a small auto garage at the corner of the street. A faded sign read, "Miller's Auto and Repair." Inside the garage, the air smelled of oil and metal. Tools hung neatly on the walls, and an old radio played softly in the background. A 32-year-old mechanic named Jake Miller looked up from under a car hood when he heard the door open. His hands were stained with grease, his shirt worn from years of honest work. Jake wasn't rich or famous, just known around town as the guy who fixed things others gave up on. When he saw Emily in the broken wheelchair and Sarah's worried face, he stepped forward without hesitation, asking gently, "What happened?" Sarah explained the situation, her voice shaking with embarrassment and stress. She expected Jake to shake his head and say it wasn't his problem. Instead, he knelt beside the wheelchair, inspecting the bent wheel and loose frame. His brow furrowed, not with annoyance but concern. Emily watched him closely. People usually spoke about her, not to her. Jake looked directly at Emily and asked her name. That small gesture felt different. She told him quietly, unsure why her chest felt tight. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen, not as a condition, but as a person. Jake fixed the wheel quickly, refusing payment. As Sarah thanked him repeatedly, Jake noticed something else, the way Emily's legs rested stiffly, the way her hands gripped the armrests. He asked careful questions, not prying, just curious. Emily hesitated, then told him everything. The accident, the doctors, the words, "You'll never walk again." Jake listened in silence. He didn't interrupt or offer fake comfort. When she finished, he simply said, "Sometimes things don't work because they're not built right the first time." Emily didn't know what he meant, but something about his tone sparked a quiet curiosity. Before they left, Jake asked if they could come back another day. Sarah looked confused. Jake explained he had an idea. Nothing dangerous, nothing expensive, just a thought about improving the wheelchair. Sarah's instincts screamed caution. Too many people had promised help before, only to disappear. But Emily felt something shift inside her. This man hadn't spoken like a savior or a salesman. He spoke like a mechanic facing a problem. Sarah agreed, though uncertainty weighed heavily on her heart. As they left the garage, Emily glanced back and saw Jake already sketching something on a piece of paper. That night, Emily lay awake staring at the ceiling. Her legs tingled faintly, or maybe it was just her imagination. She replayed Jake's words over and over. Sometimes things don't work because they're not built right. Doctors had treated her body like a closed case. Jake had looked at it like a system that needed adjustment. Emily didn't dare hope too much. Hope hurt when it failed, but for the first time in years, a small crack appeared in the wall she had built around her heart. Somewhere between fear and disbelief, a fragile possibility began to breathe. A few days later, Emily and her mother returned to Miller's Auto and Repair, both carrying a mix of nerves and uncertainty. The garage looked the same, oil-stained floor, humming fluorescent lights, and that quiet radio in the background, but something felt different. Jake greeted them with a calm smile and rolled the wheelchair inside. He explained carefully that he wasn't a doctor and wasn't promising miracles. He just believed the chair could do more than carry Emily. It could help support her body in ways therapy machines never had. Sarah listened closely. Her arms folded, fear and hope wrestling inside her at the same time. Jake began working after hours, when the garage was quiet. He measured Emily's posture, noting how her weight shifted when she tried to sit upright. Using scrap metal, adjustable rods, and old hydraulic parts, he started building a frame that could attach to the wheelchair. Emily watched from the side, feeling strange excitement mixed with doubt. Every clang of metal sounded like a question mark. Jake moved with patience, adjusting and readjusting, often stopping to ask Emily how something felt. No doctor had ever asked her that before. It made her feel involved in her own recovery. The first test day arrived sooner than Emily expected. Jake positioned the modified chair on a flat surface and locked the wheels. He explained each step slowly, making sure Emily felt safe. Sarah stood nearby, hands clenched together so tightly her knuckles turned white. When Emily placed her feet on the ground, a sharp fear shot through her. Her legs felt weak, almost foreign. Jake steadied the frame and told her to lean forward just a little. Pain flickered through her muscles, but beneath it was something else. Pressure, awareness, connection. She wasn't standing alone. The structure held her, guiding her weight. Emily's legs trembled violently as she rose inches from the seat. Her breath caught in her throat. Jake counted softly, not rushing her. Sarah gasped, covering her mouth, tears spilling freely. Emily stood for 5 seconds before her strength faded, and Jake helped her sit back down. Those 5 seconds felt longer than the last 2 years of her life. Her legs burned, but her heart raced with disbelief. She laughed and cried at the same time, overwhelmed by the simple fact that she had stood. Jake nodded quietly, already thinking of improvements, while Sarah dropped into a chair, shaking with emotion. They returned every evening after that. Some days were better than others. Emily's body protested, muscles screaming from being used again. There were moments when frustration took over, when she slammed her hands against the armrests and asked why this couldn't be easier. Jake never pushed her beyond her limit. He reminded her that machines didn't work perfectly on the first try, and neither did people. He adjusted the frame little by little, lowering supports, shifting angles, making the system respond to Emily instead of forcing her body to obey it. Money was never mentioned. Jake paid for parts out of his own pocket, selling an old motorcycle he had been restoring for years. When Sarah found out, she confronted him, tears in her eyes, saying she couldn't accept that kind of sacrifice. Jake simply shrugged and said some things mattered more than engines. For Sarah, Those words broke something open inside her. She had spent so long fighting alone that she had forgotten what help felt like. Watching Emily struggle, sweat, and slowly improve gave her a hope she was almost afraid to trust. Weeks passed, and Emily began standing longer, 10 seconds, then 30, then a full minute. Her legs shook less, responding more willingly each time. Jake added simple exercises, encouraging small movements while supported. One night, Emily lifted her heel just slightly off the ground. It was barely noticeable, but Jake saw it instantly. He froze, eyes wide, then smiled in disbelief. Sarah cried openly, no longer trying to hide her emotions. That tiny movement felt like proof that the doctor's words were not the final sentence. Still, doubt lingered. Emily had bad days when her legs refused to cooperate, when pain and exhaustion made her wonder if this was all false hope. Jake reminded her that progress was never a straight line. He shared his own failures, cars he couldn't, fix mistakes that cost him time and money. Those stories made him human, not a hero. Emily realized that strength didn't mean never falling. It meant getting back, up, even when the effort felt unbearable. Each night she went home exhausted but proud. By the end of the second month, the wheelchair had transformed into something entirely new. A hybrid support system built from persistence and belief. Emily could rise from the seat with less assistance now, her hands gripping the bars as her legs carried more weight. She wasn't walking yet, but she was no longer trapped. The garage, once just a place of oil and noise, had become a space of quiet determination. And deep inside Emily, a truth was forming. Her body wasn't broken beyond repair. It had just been waiting for someone to try differently. Months of persistent effort, countless adjustments, and endless determination finally brought Emily to a moment she had once thought impossible. The modified wheelchair system Jake had built was no longer just a tool. It had become a bridge between despair and hope. One crisp morning in Ohio, they returned to the hospital for a routine checkup. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she rolled in, Sarah by her side, holding her hand tightly. The doctors greeted them with polite curiosity, unaware of the transformation that had occurred over these months. Emily transferred carefully onto a walker, her legs trembling but responsive, each movement a testament to the long nights of sweat and perseverance. Jake had instructed her to trust her body, and she did. Cautiously but determinedly, Sarah's eyes brimmed with tears, reflecting both pride and disbelief. The doctors watched as Emily took her first tentative steps across the sterile floor. The walker clattered slightly under her weight, but she moved forward steadily. Nurses gasped softly, and one reached for her phone to capture the moment. Emily's legs burned with effort, her muscles shaking violently, but she refused to collapse. Step by step, she traversed the distance that once seemed insurmountable. Each movement was an unspoken victory over the accident, over the doubt, and over the years of fear that had chained her to the wheelchair. Sarah couldn't stop herself from crying, whispering prayers under her breath as she followed Emily closely, ready to catch her if she faltered. By the time Emily reached the middle of the hall, the silence had transformed into murmurs of astonishment. The doctors exchanged glances, unable to reconcile their previous predictions with the reality before them. This isn't possible," one muttered, eyes wide in disbelief. Emily, however, didn't hear them. She focused solely on the sensation of her legs holding her weight, her muscles responding to commands she hadn't dared to test for years. Jake, standing in the background, watched quietly, a modest smile tugging at his lips. He had never sought recognition or accolades. He had only wanted to see Emily believe in herself again. And now, after months of meticulous work and unwavering patience, she was walking. The hospital staff slowly gathered around, whispering and offering quiet encouragement. Each step Emily took was celebrated silently by those who understood the magnitude of her achievement. Sarah's hands trembled as she reached for Emily, ready to guide and support, but careful not to overstep. Emily stopped for a brief moment, taking a deep breath, and looked around at the crowd of strangers turned witnesses to her miracle. She realized the weight of what she had accomplished. It wasn't just a physical journey, but an emotional one. The wheelchair that had once symbolized limitation now sat abandoned at the side, a reminder of the obstacles she had overcome. After the hospital visit, word of Emily's progress spread throughout the community. Local newspapers ran stories, and social media posts went viral. People were inspired not only by Emily's perseverance, but also by Jake's ingenuity and selflessness. Interviews described the mechanic who had turned a broken wheelchair into a machine of hope. Jake, however, consistently deflected praise, always redirecting attention to Emily's hard work. "She's the real hero," he said during one interview, brushing his hands on his grease-stained jeans. Sarah stood nearby, nodding vigorously, her gratitude visible in every expression. The community celebrated not just the miracle of walking, but the human kindness that made it possible. Emily continued her therapy at home, practicing daily with Jake's modifications and gradually relying less on the walker. Each day, her steps grew longer, her balance stronger. By the third month, she could walk across her living room without assistance, the triumph evident in the sparkle of her eyes. Sarah often paused to watch, amazed at how far her daughter had come. The journey had been exhausting, filled with doubt, pain, and setbacks, but the result was undeniable. Emily's determination, combined with Jake's ingenuity, had defied expectations and rewritten the story of what was possible. One evening, Emily returned to the garage, not for training, but to walk freely. Unaided, Jake greeted her with his usual quiet smile, watching as she carefully moved across the concrete floor. The smell of oil and metal, once mundane, now felt sacred, infused with memories of effort and progress. Emily stopped in the center, turned, and hugged him tightly. Her legs shook slightly, but she stood firmly, supported by both strength and gratitude. Tears ran down her cheeks as she whispered, "I couldn't have done this without you." Jake simply patted her back, a subtle acknowledgement of the journey they had shared. The transformation went beyond physical mobility. Emily's confidence blossomed, and she began engaging in social activities she had once avoided. She returned to school part-time, joined art classes, and even participated in a local charity walk, pushing boundaries she had believed closed forever. Sarah watched proudly, her heart swelling with the knowledge that her daughter was reclaiming the life stolen by tragedy. The accident that had once seemed to define Emily's existence was now just a chapter, replaced by resilience, hope, and determination. Looking back, Emily realized that miracles were not always sudden or spectacular. They could be quiet, persistent, and patient. Jake had never claimed to perform miracles, yet his dedication transformed her life completely. Doctors' words had once seemed absolute, a verdict that could not be changed. But human ingenuity, paired with courage and belief, had defied probability. Emily understood that limitations existed only as long as people accepted them, by refusing to give in, by trusting herself and the mechanic who believed in her. She had taken control of her destiny. Each step was now proof of that truth. Months later, Emily and Sarah visited the local community center to share their story. Young people with disabilities and their families listened, captivated by Emily's journey from despair to independence. She spoke candidly about the challenges, the frustrations, and the fear, but also about the hope that had never fully disappeared. Jake attended quietly, standing at the back of the room, letting Emily shine. The story inspired others to reconsider what was possible, to look beyond limitations and seek creative solutions. It wasn't just about walking, it was about resilience, ingenuity, and the transformative power of belief. In the end, Emily's journey had changed more than her legs. It had altered perspectives, inspired communities, and forged bonds that could never be broken. Sarah no longer worried constantly, seeing her daughter thrive in ways she had feared impossible. Jake, the quiet mechanic, continued his work in the garage, repairing cars and other broken machines, but always remembered the girl who walked because someone refused to see a wheelchair as the end. Emily, once confined by accident and expectation, now moved forward in life with a confidence that radiated from every step, a living testament to the power of persistence, ingenuity, and unwavering belief.